Good morning, Baltimore. This is Robert Dashiell here on this side for another edition of the Board Watch. Within a few minutes, we'll be joined by co-host Hasson Barnes. He had some matters that he taken care of earlier this morning in his office. We will also be joined momentarily, I suspect, by former City Council President Nick Mosby. He's going to give us the inside scoop on how the Board of Estimates operates behind closed doors, particularly as it relates to the award of contracts and the award of grants. Before getting to Nick, who's ready to join us in the studio, I would be remiss if I didn't spend just a moment talking about the things that I think that are on a lot of people's minds. First, let me let you know that the city of Baltimore has properly, I think, joined with several other jurisdictions in filing suit against the Trump administration for not just its threat to freeze federal spending and federal subsidies for many programs throughout the state and including Baltimore City, but also with, I suspect, violation of the court order that was already entered prohibiting his administration from interfering with those allocations of funds, which were all mandated by acts of the United States Congress. My suspicion is that in this, as in other matters, Mr. Trump has taken a view that only his point of view matters. And to that end, we can look at some of the appointments that he's made in very, very critical positions. Most notably, Elon Musk, who really doesn't lead a department, the Department of Government Efficiency. There is really no such appointment. But notwithstanding that, we know that Mr. Musk, a South African billionaire, has essentially taken over, he's dismantled the U.S. AID office, which is the primary facility for providing aid as needed to offset devastation and events in many foreign countries. He's also taken over the Office of Personnel Management, which pretty much controls all the federal employees, over 2 million of them. He's taken over the Office of Management and Budget temporarily, but in the meantime, the Trump's pick to run that office, Russell Wright, is now being vetted by the Senate for the permanent position of the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, which controls the federal purse strings. Now, if you don't really know Russell Wright's name, it's not a household name, but you should know that he is the co-author of Project 25, a publication that Trump before and during the election claimed that he knew little about, but seems to be following the playbook page by page, if not paragraph by paragraph. This week, Trump also announced that he wanted to, he thought that the Gaza ought to be cleaned out, meaning getting rid of the remaining Palestinians who haven't already been killed by the Israeli onslaught, and perhaps converting it to some sort of resort. We've heard rumors of that his son-in-law was inclined to do that some time ago. And we know also that Trump wants to seize and colonize Greenland. He's talked about renaming the Gulf of Mexico, taking back the Panama Canal, having Canada and Mexico join as 51st and 52nd states. Some of those things are outlandish, but the point is they reflect, in my view, the mindset of a dictator, of someone who thinks that the laws are for people other than him. Well, enough of that for the time being. We want to get back to Baltimore City. I see President Mosby is with us here. I'm going to allow him to come in, and hopefully, as I say, my co-host Hasson Barnes, Attorney Barnes, will be with us shortly. Give me a minute. Let me bring in President Mosby. Good morning, Nick. How are you?
Good morning, Attorney Dashiell. How are you doing today?
Great. As I told the by way of background, why don't you tell us your path to political ascendancy? How did you get to be the president of the city council?
So, when I came back from college. I went to Tuskegee University in Alabama, majored in electrical engineering. I worked as an engineer here. Bought a house at the age of 25 in West Baltimore, abandoned shelf. Was abandoned for almost 22 years, and quickly got involved in my neighborhood association. And I decided to run for city councilman. I was like 25 years old again. I ran, ultimately lost. I came in fourth out of 11 or 12 people who ran for an open seat in the 11th district. And 4 years later, I decided to run again through the SRB administration. The lines census happened and the lines were changed. And it was a seat that I thought I could win. Ultimately ran, beat a two-term incumbent, was elected to city council. And there I served and was able to do a lot of great things. One of the things I'm most proud of is passing the most progressive form of ban the box anywhere in the entire country at the time. Was done here in Baltimore City. It was my bill. From there, obviously, things like the Freddie Gray situation happened. SRB decided that she wasn't going to run again. I decided to run for mayor. My candidacy did not take off. I did not win. Kathy Pugh became mayor of Baltimore at the time. I gave up my seat to run for mayor. But then because Kathy Pugh, who was a state senator, became mayor, her Senate seat opened and then a delegate seat opened. Went for delegate, knew that I was not going to get it because the person that was going to get it had all the votes already locked and loaded. Went to there, interviewed, and surprisingly, I was able to win the delegate seat. Got selected, went to Annapolis for 4 years, ran for city council president, and came back to Baltimore. And this is where I'm in now. So that's my journey through politics in Baltimore City.
All right. I want to ask you, before getting into sort of the inner workings of the Board of Estimates, I want to focus on one specific action that the board took while you were president, and that has to do with the BGE conduit. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because obviously that the issue of rising utility costs is very much in the news these days, and even the state is making some suggestions that they may try to do something to alleviate the tremendous burden that the rising utility bills are having upon the citizens. So why don't you tell me what happened? I thought that the citizens of Baltimore had approved a charter amendment that it was intended to prohibit the transfer, either legally or effectively, the transfer of the city's conduit system to a private party, or by any means, effectively or literally. But it seems as though, notwithstanding that charter amendment, it happened anyway. Can you fill us in on exactly how that occurred?
So you're right. There's a charter amendment that basically takes away the ability to wholeheartedly sell or transfer. If you could recall, when I was running for mayor, this is one of the big things I always talked about. BG&E put up an offer for, I believe, $100 million to buy underground utility infrastructure. I, as an electrical engineer and someone who's worked on underground infrastructure for a large part of my career, I kind of understood and knew the value of it. And it was concerning back in 2015, $100 million for it. And it was certainly concerning of mine when I became city council president. So that charter amendment was put in by former mayor Jack Young. It was ultimately passed by the voters, but it didn't go into effect until the middle of my term. So right prior to that, there was a consulting deal to kind of review and ultimately put up a recommendation to the city on what we should do with the underground facilities. That inside of that agreement, if you read the fine print, the consulting shop would ultimately receive money if the city ultimately decided to sell. So obviously, they were more inclined probably to tell us that we should sell it. I'm not sure for how much. And, I just made a big stink about it as city council president, was able to delay it until after the charter amendment went into effect. So no longer would we be able to sell. So then the idea came from like almost this management, taking over full scale operations from a BG&E perspective of the underground utility. And it's something that, I adamantly fought against and I had concerns about, but, ultimately it was able to be passed by the mayor of Baltimore.
It seemed to a lot of people at the time that if the city was concerned about the ongoing cost of maintaining the system, and by the underground, the conduit system, what we're talking about is those pipes, if you will, that inside of which the electrical lines, cable TV lines, and I think some other lines are inserted, and they travel underground through those pipes throughout the city. So, but it seemed to me that was some concern at the time of, as if the city didn't have enough money projecting forward to maintain the conduit system, why they simply didn't increase the charge to the users, the charge to BGE, the charge to cable TV and others. Why was it necessary at all to consider transferring ownership or management when, like every other landlord would do when it faced increased costs, raise the rent?
Well, I think that was kind of one of my points of my arguments at the time. I just didn't understand the but-for test. Like, why are we doing this? Over the course of that time period, there were certain stipulations that the city had to kind of do, and that was building up the capacity and the skill set and the professionalism of the folks that were responsible for ultimately, managing and operating the conduit under Department of Transportation. And, if you look at over the course of that period, there weren't any major issues. There were no major complaints. The city really stepped up and built out, the capabilities of the city in a way that we didn't have prior to those agreements with the utility companies. The fact of the matter is, the city was receiving, I can't remember the exact numbers, but close to like $30 million a year, in leasing of the conduit system from these utility companies, from one said utility company. So, I don't think it never, no one's able to show me any data that said it was a monetary thing. Like, we did not have the resources to sustain or continue to build out, which was, again, one of the issues that, I confronted and had concerns with.
And we also, there seemed to be a good bit of controversy around how the Board of Estimates, quote, approved the management agreement, I think it was called, between the city and BGE. I think you and Comptroller Henry tried to get the administration to reconsider its position simply by not showing up at what was scheduled to be a meeting of the Board of Estimates. Can you tell us what happened there and why that strategy ultimately was not successful, apparently?
So there was a timeline, and I can't remember exactly what was the triggered timeline, but there was a time. Well, first and foremost, there was a way in the past where the city council president or the comptroller could ultimately defer an item on the Board of Estimates, and they had like unlimited power and control. I mean, Board of Estimates is a body of 5, the mayor and two of his appointees. So ultimately, the mayor at the time has the ability to control the board. The council president is the kind of facilitator of the board, and then the comptroller is kind of a participant as well. But we had the ability of, in the past, of deferring. The comptroller, for whatever reason, wanted to put in a rule on the Board of Estimates that only allowed for us to defer for a certain time period, for a finite time period. So I believe it's 2 meetings that you can defer. Other than that, you have to go back to the board and get board approval. Obviously, if it's something that the administration really wants, then they're not going to approve the deferral past the 2 meetings that the board that Comptroller Henry decided to put this rule about. So that was really kind of the sticker of this concern. So, I deferred it. Ultimately asked him to defer it. He deferred it, but then we didn't have any more deferrals. But there was a timeline associated with whatever contract or whatever they were attempting to do that fell beyond the date of the BOE. So, in working with the comptroller, we decided like, hey, well, they need our vote. Obviously you can't call in the meeting without the city council president. It's never been done before. So we're not going to go. And we would like to work with the administration offline to try to figure out a better course of action, because we just didn't understand why it was moving so fast. And ultimately we decided not to go. Ultimately, the mayor, as well as appointees, said that they duly called in the call to order the meeting. They only took up this one particular issue. They voted it out. And the city solicitor and had an opinion that they could do that. The Attorney General office wouldn't weigh in on this matter for us to provide some guidance. And ultimately the decision was had, and the contract was awarded.
Okay. Before I ask you another question about follow up with that, we have now been joined by my co-host, Hasson Barnes, who's going to slide down and ask him to introduce himself to you, and then we're going to go farther with the discussion of the Board of Estimates.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Certainly welcome to our guests. How are you? I was sitting listening to City Council President Mosby's explanation as to what happened. I know a lot of people in the city were curious about the whole BG&E. Many people didn't actually understand what was going on, whether it was politicians, and I've talked to several city council people who didn't quite have the same idea as what was going on, and certainly citizens were kind of befuddled by the whole process and what we were doing. So having you here today to give information and some hindsight is helpful.
Yeah, you mentioned the city solicitor's opinion. It had been my opinion, and frankly, all of the others attorneys that I've discussed it with, and as you know, I've been dealing with the Board of Estimates for many, many years. It had been my opinion that under the city charter, the board could only operate as a board and was required to operate as a board of 5 people. That there's no such thing as a Board of Estimates meeting with less than 5 people, whether they were the elected officials or their duly designated appointees. Nevertheless, there always had to be 5 people in order for the board to actually exist. Whose opinion was it that a board meeting could occur with only 3 people present? Essentially, the mayor meeting with himself.
Yeah, that's what the solicitor came out with, and said that it was a duly appointed, body, and that, based off of the city charter and based off of the rules of the Board of Estimates, that they could conduct business the way that they did. And again, the only recourse that I had as city council president at the time was to turn to the office of the Attorney General, who weighs in a lot, but they ultimately opted not to. They thought that this was a municipality specific issue, and that they didn't have any jurisdiction of providing an opinion. And ultimately, there was no additional recourse that we could take at that point.
Were there any legal challenges to that? Did anyone file suit claiming the actual Board of Estimates didn't have the authority pursuant to the makeup of the board?
So the only people that could file suit, obviously, the city council cannot, because from a city perspective, we are the mayor and city council. That's it's an entity. It's you can't sue yourself. Nick Mosby can't sue Nick Mosby. But a lay citizen or someone impacted or felt like they had some type of damage associated with it certainly could. There was just no one willing to step up to do so.
Let's move on to contracts generally, and how the Board of Estimates, the members of the board, consider and make decisions on the recommendations that come from the various city agencies with respect to the award of contracts. The 2 largest agencies in that respect being the Department of Public Works, I think, and the Department of Transportation. The the agencies at some point come up with a recommendation for award of contracts. They pass those recommendations. If they're approved, ultimately wind up in the agenda that's prepared by the comptroller's office, and then the board meets publicly to announce its decision as to whether to accept or reject the recommendation, or to reject the solicitation, cancel the solicitation altogether. What happens? What's the process for the consideration by the individual board members of the recommendations that come from the agencies for contract awards?
Yeah, so obviously, it's kind of like three different buckets. One is the administration, so that's the mayor, the city solicitor, and the director of DPW. Then the second bucket is the comptroller's office, and then the third bucket is the city council president's office. Obviously, in each bucket, the way that you review items on the Board of Estimates is kind of your own prerogative. From a mayor's perspective, the administration perspective, the agencies are the ultimate kind of originators of the items that are applied. So they basically, through systems that the city has internally, fill out documents and ultimately provide the necessary information, be it, documentation from law or documentation from external parties, to ask to be placed on the next agenda. And then ultimately it's the comptroller's office that is responsible for kind of the administration aspect of pulling together the preliminary agenda. So when the preliminary agenda is pulled together, so say maybe there's an agenda of 100 different items, that preliminary agenda is then sent around to all of the Board of Estimates, which in turn we have the ability to obviously review it. And then what we do, we go through it and we identify areas of concerns of maybe information that hasn't been provided by the administration, or items that are new that we have no prior knowledge of, and we'll reach out to those independent agencies, for a briefing or to sit down and kind of talk about it. And then from there, if we have concerns, we can go back and forth and jockey in different questions and concerns, and we can ultimately decide to defer. Again, I just talked about the comptroller's rule change, where he limited our ability to defer indefinitely. We only are able to defer 2 meetings, but we can defer, which we get an automatic deferral, or we can go to the board and kind of hash it out and talk there. But that is really it. There is no, I know that, there were talks of, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago where there was always like a pre-Board of Estimates meeting before the Open Meetings Act, but that doesn't occur. So there's never a meeting between like the city council president, the comptroller, and the mayor specific to items on the board of agenda. So, I have the ability to pick up the phone and contact the mayor's office, or I have the ability to pick up the phone and contact the comptroller, but there is no like orchestrated level or frequency of meetings between the 3 entities to talk about it, because obviously that would be a Board of Estimates meeting.
So there's no more mini board meetings. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there's no I think there was a time where, the room to the right of everyone facing the dais, everyone would come out because they would kind of go over the agenda, all there. No, we no longer are able to do that, obviously, because that would violate the Open Meetings Act.
Okay. So what happens, what's the process for resolution of issues that the 2 so-called independent members of the board, the city council president, the comptroller, what happens if you disagree with the administration's, the mayor's office on a particular item, whether it's a contract award or a grant award or whatever? How do those disagreements get handled?
Well, ultimately, you've seen it several times, through my administration. I think that, what we really want to do is elevate the importance of Board of Estimate. We wanted to try to engage the general population to be more vocal and more participatory and engaged in the process. And we ultimately wanted to hold not the mayor per se, but the administration, meaning the agency, accountable for some of the decisions that kind of just became rubber stamped on the city, on the Board of Estimates. And I think that when you see some of the the change of a board of estimates from when I first started to where we ended. There's significant change as it relates to the culture and the normalization of certain things that happened prior to me getting there as city council president. So, I mean, again, when you have an issue or you're concerned, you go to the agency, you go to administration, sit down, you talk about it, you ask questions, you ask for information. And, you know, a lot of times they're unwilling to kind of pull it. But as you can see, I mean, you look at through several different board of estimates agendas, on multiple occasions, we've been able to work with the administration and get them to pull certain items because of certain issues. So, you know, I think, you know, I really pushed this idea of professionalizing the council in a way that we had a seat at the table based off of the limitations that the charter allows us to kind of act as a city council. But, you know, I think that we maximize that, particularly as it relates to our role and our presence on the board of estimates. Obviously, we didn't win them all. Probably the biggest is the BOE, which, you know, I was definitely thankful for what we were able to do to kind of, I mean, the BGE conduit issue. I was definitely able to I'm proud of the work that we were able to do to get it to where we got it to. Because, you know, before, you know, again, this was a issue that I took all the way back to 2016 when I ran for mayor. And I kind of knew it in a way, in an intense way that most people would not. So I was able to get to the comptroller. I was able to educate him and bring him up to speed to ultimately jump on my side. And then we were able to delay and we were able to kind of publicize it. Obviously, the administration got exactly what they want in the end, but I think that it was definitely like a textbook example of, you know, why there's some certain issues associated with the structure and operations associated with city government and the BOE.
Hey, you mentioned a couple of times, and in particular in relation to the BGE matter, an opinion from the city solicitor's office. And I recognize and obviously know that the city solicitor is appointed by the mayor and serves at the mayor's pleasure. But nevertheless, the city solicitor is the city solicitor of an entity called the Mayor and City Council of Baltimore. It's not the city solicitor under the charter is not the mayor's lawyer. The city solicitor is the city's lawyer. So in your experience in the council as a member, a general member, or as president, have there been occasions that you are aware of where the city law department, where the mayor, whoever it may have been, took a certain position on an issue, but the city solicitor, an issue that the city council felt differently about, but the city solicitor came out with an opinion that supported the council?
Never. But that was one of the reasons why. That was one of the reasons why we created a chartered position when I was on the council to have a dedicated council for the city council. So, you know, now based through charter amendment, the city council has its own attorney. Now, I think it's important to say when you say the solicitor is the attorney for the city and of this entity called the mayor and city council. Well, if you look at it from like a corporate perspective, a corporate structure, we all can kind of understand that the mayor is literally the chief executive officer. So, you know, in any corporation, there's not many times where the chief executive officer ask for or expect a direct report to do something that's not going to be really consistent with what they want to do. They're going to kind of listen to, you know, some downstream entity called the city council like that. So just the inherent nature of the structure of it, you know, obviously the solicitor is there to be supportive of the administration and the mayor.
Well, if you were to extrapolate that structure to the corporate world, I would say yes, the mayor is the CEO, and I would regard perhaps the city council as the board of directors, if you will.
But it's not. No, but it's not. I mean, I think certain city structures are set up that way, but that's not the case. The city council's authority over the mayor, just there is none. The only thing the city council can do directly to the mayor and city of Baltimore based off our charter is one, veto something that the mayor throws over to us. And that's 10 out of the 15 members have to be in support of that veto, or the city council can now redirect monies associated with the budget. Before we could only cut, now we can cut and redirect that money. Those are the only two things that the city council can do directly associated with the mayor. So that's why it's completely different than like a CEO reporting to a board of directors structure.
Well, I understand that the authority of the board may be restricted, and obviously is restricted by the charter.
What I'm saying is not even that it's restricted. I'm saying structurally, it's a different structure. The board of in a CEO type of board relationship, the board sits outside of the corporation, and the CEO reports to the board. In this scenario, mayor and city council, that and is not just like a conjunction. That and is part of the noun of the mayor and city council. It's an entity. So the city council sits inside of the administration associated with the mayor and city council. That's the way the charter is written.
Well, yeah, I trust me. I understand how the charter is written, but you mentioned earlier that the council, for example, couldn't sue. The council as an entity couldn't sue the corporation known as the mayor and city council. And I'm trying to liken that to all the lawsuits that we see all the time where Congress or a member of Congress sues the president or sues the administration.
Because Congress is a different entity. Congress doesn't sit in the executive branch. So Congress sits.
But neither does the city council.
Yes, it does, based off the city charter. So if you look at the United States Constitution, there's defined branches of executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch. Yeah. Now, based off of the name, or when we look at the state house, there is the governor, which is the executive branch, the General Assembly, which is the legislative branch. When we look at the city council, when we look at Baltimore City, it's one entity. It's basically the executive branch. There's no separate.
But then why have a council at all?
I mean, you could say that. You could argue that.
I mean, so I'd say that to say that I understand your view. I just don't agree with it. But anyway, let's move on.
We're talking. You're a lawyer. Tell me exactly from a city charter perspective what I'm saying you don't agree with.
I think that the charter creates the office of the mayor, and I think that the same charter creates the city council.
Under the entity of the mayor and city council.
And I think that the charter defines the functions of both. The mayor and city council is the name of the corporation. The mayor and city council is the municipal corporation doing business as the mayor and city council of Baltimore. But under the charter, that corporation has certain functions and has certain entities within and under it. The city council is one that has legislative power generally. The mayor's office is the executive branch. And under the executive branch, all the agencies come under that. The city solicitor, all the departments, all those are part of the executive branch. But the city council, as a legislative branch, is separate and apart from the executive branch, which gives you the power and the authority to introduce legislation, to pass legislation, to veto legislation that's supported by the administration, and so forth. So I think that the problem, of course, is, and I'm not just talking about the current city solicitor, but it's been this way for the last 50 years.
Because it's the way that the charters. There's no. I would ask you this, Bob. In history of Baltimore, when has that ever happened? And if not, why?
I have seen, for example, only in one occasion, for example, I've seen the city solicitor at a board of public works meeting disagree with, and in fact vote against the mayor.
What I'm suggesting is not that someone had like the independent will to speak out against their boss. I'm not suggesting that. That's happened probably a couple of times I can name on my hand. What I'm suggesting is in your understanding of city government, because we're back to the charter and we're back to this idea of like, suing or bringing like some type of civil action. Do you know of a time in city government where the city council has taken the administration to court? And I would argue that no. And I would argue the reason that there is no, even though it's been attempted, is because of the way the charter is written.
I don't know that it's been attempted, and I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if it's never happened, because the city council would first look to its lawyer, the city solicitor, who's also the lawyer, because that's the lawyer for the entire city.
That's my point. Because
you would look. Let me finish. You look to the city council, city solicitor for guidance. The citizen, you dance to the tune of the one who plays it. So
that's the point.
The city solicitor is appointed by the mayor, and it controls his salary, his or her salary. So I'm not surprised that there's never been a city solicitor opinion that says the city council can.
No, you're missing my point, Bob. It's not that I think both of us agree that, and I've been very explicit that the city solicitor has always taken the point of the administration, has always kind of come out in a favorable opinion of that. This has nothing to do about this current administration. It's what is always basically from Nielsen to it's the way it's always happened, right? I guess what the point I'm trying to make to you is, you were telling me earlier that the city council can take the mayor or the administration or agency to court. And what I'm communicating to you is, based off a city charter, that is impossible. It's kind of like an entity inside of Nike suing another entity inside of Nike. Like, it doesn't happen. It can't happen. I wanted us to be really clear about that. So I thought
I understand what you're saying, and what you said was clear. I just don't happen to agree. I just and I'm not surprised that, and I may be alone in that opinion. But I'm certainly not surprised that every city solicitor that I've known, who I don't know many to whom that question has been posed, but I wouldn't be surprised that if all of them would disagree with me, because I don't sign their checks. I don't sign their paycheck, and so
I think the court would disagree by not accepting the suit. I think the attorney general would argue very favorably to the opinion that I'm providing.
But the attorney general wouldn't get involved. You tried that, so why would they get involved in that suit?
There's precedents where they've communicated that in writing.
Okay.
I said that you guys have been having a good civics lesson, but I think for the audience, we may want to move along. Get some more questions. Certainly, people want to hear more from Council President Mosby than the civics of whether the city council has a right to bring suit. Although I'm interested as a lawyer, I think people
that gets into. Let me move on to the other issue about the role of the city council and as represented by its president sitting on the board of estimates, and we know that Nick has tremendous experience in both capacities, both as a member and as president. So let's get to getting back to contract awards. You presided over, I don't know, I can't even count how many meetings where the board has been asked to resolve protests or consider protests by various contractors who think that the recommendation to award to somebody other than them was wrong for whatever reason. And more likely than not, at least in my experience, 99% of the time, the reason has to do with some perceived or alleged defect in the minority participation that's been either required or offered. But so at the state level, when a bidder has a protest, there are several steps to getting that resolved. It goes initially to the procurement officer within the agency that issued the solicitation, and assuming the procurement officer doesn't sustain it, if the disappointed bidder can then file an appeal with an entity called the Maryland State Board of Contract Appeals, on which my daughter sits as the first and only, until recently, the only Black member of that board. Senator Carter has now been appointed by the governor as she becomes the second African-American member. But in that process of resolution of that protest can extend over a considerable period of time, because there's an opportunity for the parties to conduct discovery, for interrogatories, no depositions, but interrogatories, document production and things, and a real hearing where witnesses are called and placed under cross-examination and so forth. All of that to afford the disappointed bidder an opportunity to prove their case, or for the government to prove that the procurement officer was correct in denying the protest initially. In the city, I say all that to say is that in the city, as I recall, the Board of Estimates officially can get a protest as late as the day before your meeting or the Monday before your Wednesday meeting, no more, and that being no more than 24 to 48 hours to decide whether to uphold or to deny that protest. How is the board able to do that within 24, 48 hours, a process which at the state level can extend necessarily over several months?
Well, the board, before Comptroller Henry's council BOE rule change, was able to do that in a way of a deferral. So if someone had an issue with a problem and they came in and provided a letter of protest, it was the city council president or it was the comptroller that was able to kind of defer it. Now, as I discussed, both parties can defer, but they can only defer for a maximum of 2 scheduled meetings. So that's what created a finite amount of time. And it doesn't provide the level of scrutiny or the level of engagement that sometimes, many of these really large contracts need. As city council president, no matter when I received the protest letter, I always allowed it to be entered into the formal record and allowed the protester to kind of communicate it. And most of the times, if it was a protest, I would talk to the protester to see if they wanted me to defer it for 2 weeks. The allotted time that I had once the Bill Henry rule went into effect. So that's kind of, just the nature of the rules of the Board of Estimates, the way that they are currently today. But that wasn't always the case. That was something that, again, was done by Comptroller Henry.
Yeah. Has there ever been, to your recollection, any ordinance or policy or regulation proposed that would, in fact, adopt city level the process and the procedure that the state follows for resolution, that is to adopt the process which allowed for the parties to have discovery of information and document production, and then a hearing to call witnesses and all of that before a final decision is made? Has there ever been any legislation proposed that would require that kind of process in the city?
No, and it would be a charter amendment. It wouldn't be just a resolution or ordinance. So not that I'm aware of. My 14 years being involved, has there been a proposed a charter amendment to allow for a commission, an independent body, to kind of review or have some level of due process for the complaint.
Let me ask you this, someone jump in. I have clients, small businesses, and they typically won't do a protest. Once they're denied, they move on. The idea that they won't prevail. When you were on and as the president of the city council and you were on the Board of Estimates, how often would you guys actually approve a protest and that contractor come in and claims foul? How often would you guys actually uphold the agency versus actually decide that the person or the company in question had a good argument?
So, I mean, as it relates to me personally fighting for small businesses and folks that had, legitimate protest issues, all the time, as it relates to getting consensus, meaning the administration who has the majority of votes on the board to support, I would say we probably maybe a dozen over the past 4 years have gotten them to have gotten to the table where we've seen a protest and we needed something pulled back, and they've ultimately looked at it and it was so egregious that they agreed to do so.
With that said, 12 or 4 years is a very small number. For small businesses who typically can't afford to have counsel, go to court or go to a hearing and do a protest if they're going to lose because they don't have the revenue for it. What other options would they have? So if they actually lose and they think they actually are the best bidder for something, they lose for whatever reason they think, what option do they have other than the bid protest process?
Well, you guys don't want me to say this, but I'll say it because you asked me the question. I would tell small businesses, just come to me. Just pick up the phone, contact me, let me know what your concerns are. I looked at myself as an advocate for small businesses inside of the administration. And, many times that's what happened. And I would ultimately, take their protests or take their concerns to the administration, and it would kind of go in the same a throughput that it would, whether they showed up with a high-powered attorney like yourself or they just came by themselves, right? So I would say, like, look, if you can't afford an attorney, but obviously, Mr. Dashiell and you, Mr. Barnes, you're going to have obviously the accessibility, you're going to have the time, you're going to know exactly kind of what to kind of put on the record that maybe a lay person would not. So my suggestion is always, if you can afford an attorney, to have one. But to the small businesses who cannot afford to have an attorney or retainer, or to bring an attorney out, that still doesn't mean that your voice is silenced, particularly under my leadership. I can't speak for the current administration and what the current president is doing. But again, just because you don't show up with an attorney doesn't mean that you're not going to be. I mean, I know of a particular incident where there was a homeowner, and this wasn't necessarily a contract award, but a homeowner felt aggrieved based off of the decision that was being made from a zoning perspective, and something that DPW wanted to ultimately do. And they came out, they didn't have an attorney. We worked with them, and we were ultimately able to kind of get that change. So, I mean, it's one of those things, like, it's never, cut and dry. It's always gray area. There's always opportunity. So, I just ask folks whether I think people get involved with the Board of Estimates when it's too late. I think that as a small business, naturally, whether you're on the agenda, whether there's a bid on the agenda, if there's a way that you can find time and organize and collectively understand and know the way the Board of Estimates is operating and moving, then you should be participatory in that process. What I tell the average voter is voting and being part of the process doesn't start and stop on election day. It simply just starts. And to be honest with you, that's kind of like the bare minimum of what you can do to participate in the process. So we just need folks more engaged in understanding and knowing the inner workings of city government, and being participatory and engaged in that process. And to small business owners, I stress the importance of, not just coming to a Board of Estimates, not just focus on the Board of Estimates when you're on the agenda, because you're on the short end of the stick of getting a contract.
Yeah. And I would say that my experience is that you have been open and you have been accessible, and part of the issue in terms of when folks could bring the issue to your attention has to do with when they find out about it.
Yeah.
So I know from experience that in many cases, I've had cases where I have a client who was supposed to be awarded the contract that didn't find out until he saw the agenda that it was being protested by somebody, even though the protest has been sitting in the agency for weeks and sometimes months before, but they were never notified. Yeah. So the absence of a uniform, consistent, and global method of dealing with it. I mean, everybody didn't have as the open door policy that you had, and everybody didn't have an office where someone responsible was nearly as accessible as you were. In fact, I would venture to say no one had an office that was accessible.
That means a lot coming from you, Brother Dashiell.
Yeah. No one had an office that was accessible as you were in your office. But now, getting back to the kinds of matters that kinds of matters that come before the board, in almost all of the protests that I've been involved with, and I would venture to say I probably had more protests before the Board of Estimates over the last 40 or 50 years than any lawyer in the city. 99% of them have to do with some alleged or asserted deficiency relating to minority business participation. And the question is this: I've seen situations where it seemed to me everybody was in the room except common sense. I've seen situations where the low bidder, who otherwise might get the award, was denied because of a relatively minor deficiency in its minority participation. But let me put some numbers there to try to make some sense. And this is a hypothetical.
I think that we don't have to hit hypothetical, Mr. Dashiell. I think that was my last Board of Estimates with you, was an example. Yeah. I mean, that was glaring.
Yeah, that was so that people know that and it happened to be on my birthday, which made it worse. I think I said it was a dark day when I was there. But I represented a certified minority company that was the low bidder on 3 contracts, by a substantial amount, but submitted a bid which contained an item that asked for more money than the city said it would pay for that particular item. And so I, along with the comptroller and you, said, okay, well, just don't pay them more than what we said we would pay them. No harm found. It doesn't change the price of the work, and certainly is not the harm to the other bidders. So, but the mayor decided that that the low bidder needed to be penalized for not following the rules. Well, the price of that penalty for the taxpayers was an extra $2 million in the aggregate. So in that situation, rather than simply follow the directive that you announced in the bid, which was not paying more than a certain amount for this item, which would have made everybody happy, the mayor decided that the right thing to do was to penalize the minority contractor for not following the rules and thereby cause the taxpayers to spend $2 million. I didn't think it made sense then. You didn't think it made sense then. The comptroller didn't think it made sense then. The mayor said it makes sense to me. How does that make sense? How did that make sense?
I mean, I can't really recall the arguments that the administration had at the time. I believe not only the procurement officer, maybe the solicitor office kind of spoke to it. I don't remember their arguments, but, ultimately, the Board of Estimates, the administration has 3 votes and there's 2 other independent votes. And, I would say probably 85% of the votes where there were a dissenting party were for the one. So it's typically I was the one that was voting against, and majority of times the comptroller votes with the administration. So
do you think, and this is again that relates to minority business participation, the state is now considering a modification of its procurement law to allow greater flexibility on the evaluation of bids or proposals relating to minority business participation, so that hopefully, without opening the door completely, that can be common sense can have a greater prevalence in the consideration. Do you think that over the years, the what I call the zero tolerance policy as it relates to minority participation has been too strict? In other words, were there times when the otherwise low bidder should have been given a greater opportunity to bring into compliance its MBE participation, rather than going to the second or third low bidder and costing the taxpayers hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I was a huge a proponent of some real procurement reform in the city of Baltimore. I think the issue that we're all talking about, Bob, is to the forefront of like where we're going to move, particularly as a people. Mm-hmm. And I say that because, a place like Baltimore with, at the time they had a Black president, we've had, now a Black U.S. senator, Black congressman, Black governor, Black majority general assembly, Black speaker of the House, Black county executives, majority Black councils. If through that pipeline, we can't figure out a way to get it right, meaning having a more equitable view of how business is handled in the city of Baltimore, ensuring that local businesses, ensuring that minority-owned businesses, ensuring that women-owned businesses are able to grow and scale inside our city, understanding, that ecosystem of them hiring and them giving back and them being supportive of our community just uplifts everybody. If we can't get that right in those conditions, what's really concerning about me is where we're headed to next. Because the reality is in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we might not be talking about these programs anymore as it relates to some of the rulings that we see out of the Supreme Court. It started with education. It will flow over to companies. So I say this to say, Bob, I think, and I have to run, but I say this to say, like, right now is a time where we need to wake up, right? And it's no longer us arguing and going back and forth over the technicalities of where we are in this pursuit of fully participatory type of governing bodies associated with the dissemination of contracts throughout city. But it's really about understanding and knowing that this is a very unique time and a very scary time, and it's time for folks to not just be performative, but folks to actually put a rubber to the road and develop solutions and opportunities for folks to kind of benefit from. Economic empowerment is truly the key to our communities. And that's the thing I constantly push for, and I'll continue to push for. But right now is a wake-up call for all of us. And, I hope that, the folks that are in elected officials understand that, and we don't just become the puppets for this DEI movement. We're not just the ones that's out in front, because obviously the DEI has never necessarily benefited communities that I care about the most, communities that I'm from. When you look at the state of them, and even the programs that have been developed don't necessarily have benefited folks that look like me in the wholesale way that they should have. So it's time for us to wake up as a people.
To that point, I want to ask a question. I know you have to go soon. As we see Trump's administration using executive orders to change policy throughout the country, which also affects cities, in terms of procurement, in terms of the Board of Estimates, what do you think could be done? And I'm concerned because my clients are small businesses, very small businesses. What do you think can be done via the Board of Estimates to promote and support more minority business participation in Baltimore City?
I think that we need to drill down on the demographics. I mean, the reality is when we look at, a place like Baltimore and the Baltimore metropolitan area and the amount of small businesses that we have here, and we see the disproportionate amount of small minority-owned businesses that are able to actually get contracts and get awards through our city, it's concerning. I think that when we drill down in the data and we're able to determine that in certain departments like the mayor's office of information technology, for one, and the amount of waivers that have occurred there over the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, it's concerning. When I think that when we don't intentionally ensure that there's like market research analysis done on a regular basis to identify what credible entities have the capabilities to do some of this work, I think it's critically important. I think that when we look at, I'm proud that, I was able to literally push through the DPW unbundling of one contract, that we need to do that in other sectors, in other areas. I think that we also need to ensure that it's not just about lowest grade, but it's also about bringing in characteristics of, past performance, but also, are you based in Baltimore? How many citizens of Baltimore are currently on your payroll? I think it's many of factors that we could do to create a more perfect system that benefits all of us, that benefits the city of Baltimore. And those are the things that I always stress and I'll continue to stress, even as a lay citizen.
As you leave now, let me thank you for your time this morning and for your, and really mean it when I say thank you for your service in the council and as president of the council and as presiding officer of the Board of Estimates. Because many times I was there, you were the only refreshing voice that was to be heard.
That's why they took me out, Bob.
Yeah. Where do you go from here politically? What's in your future as you see it?
I'm be the best father I could be a citizen and watch once in a while and give my opinions once in a while. But, being an elected official, particularly when you do it the way that I did it, sometimes feels very thankless. It's one of those things where it's not a 40-hour a week type of job. You're up at night, you're up in the morning, you're going on the weekend. There's a tremendous amount of sacrifice that you take. But I did it and I don't take it for granted. I'm appreciative of the opportunity. It's something I always wanted to do growing up here in the city of Baltimore. I'm thankful for the citizens for providing me that opportunity. But, I'm looking forward to just a regular, normal life and being able to do things more with my girls that I couldn't necessarily do before. I learned a lot, and, I still want to give back to the city of Baltimore, the city that I love and communities I love. And I think that, some of the things that we wish for and we hope for can still happen. And I'll continue to push forward just from a different seat, not as an elected official.
Thank you, Nick. I wish you well. And if there's anything I can do, because you and I agree more than what we disagree on.
Always. But I always love our disagreements because they're always very colorful. And I always learn so much.
Well, hopefully if I can certainly help you in any way of your pursuits, let me know. I'm not going anywhere till the Lord rings the bell.
Yeah, well, we need you there, and we definitely need you showing up at City Hall, 100 Holiday Street on Wednesday mornings for BOEs, because you always bring a very colorful but also poignant and incredible voice to the fight that we all care about on this call.
Thank you, Nick. See you later, and don't hesitate to call.
Thank you. Take care.
See you, Brother Barnes. Good. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye. All right. We're going to, in the few seconds that we have left, let you know that we are still trying to improve and perfect this hour that you spend. We hope that you find it informative, and God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be here next Friday. Thank you, Baltimore. Goodbye.
Bye. Take care, guys.